because I struggled at the beginning to pick that lane because, like many speakers starting out, I thought I can speak about whatever you need. What do you need? Oh, you need a sales speaker? I can talk about sales. I grew a business from nothing into 8 figures in annual revenue. Like, I can talk about that. Oh, you need a marketing speaker? I have a master's degree in marketing. I can talk about how I marketed my company. Oh, you need a leadership speaker? Let me talk about building a team.
Hey, what's up, friends? Grant Baldwin here. Welcome back to the Speaker Lab podcast. Today, chatting with my friend Brittany Hodak, and excited about her journey. She's been killing it in the speaking world, and then we recently connected the dots. She actually went through the Speaker Lab in 2018, which is like an eternity ago in real years or dog years or speaker years or whatever form of measurement we choose to track. But nonetheless, she's absolutely crushing it in her speaking business. So we're going to pull back the curtain today and talk about that. So, Brittany, welcome. How are you today?
Hey, Grant, I'm great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, this is gonna be fun. So, first of all, why don't you kind of set the stage of who are you speaking to? What are you speaking about? How much are you speaking? Kind of give us the 30,000 foot view of your speaking business.
Of course. So I speak on customer experience. I teach people how to turn customers into superfans. The majority of the speaking that I do is in the corporate space. I do some association events, but mainly it's corporate events. And I'm speaking a lot. I will probably do, I don't know, maybe 80 events this year. I did about 60 in 2024 and about exactly 60 in 2023 in person, and then probably a couple dozen virtual that I don't really count in that total because those feel a lot like podcasts.
Yeah. How have you figured out what the right number is? Like, I think this is one thing that speakers struggle with sometimes is going like, when you have a lot of demand and there's a lot of opportunity, and we were talking a little bit before we started recording of just good opportunities, because there's certainly things like, nah, I don't want to do that. Nah, I don't want to do that. But then you're also just like, yeah, I know I said I was only going to do 60, but that one seems cool. What's one more? What's one more? What's one more? So how have you kind of navigated and figuring out like what's that right balance for you?
I'm going to be honest. I feel like I haven't. I My speaking really picked up at the beginning of 2023 when my book Creating Superfans came out. And I think in 2022, I did like 20 events. And I had said to my husband before the book launch,
She
if
gone?
I can do 40 a year, that would be incredible. And so that was kind of the goal, was could I do 40 in 2023? And I had 40 either done or on the calendar by like June. And so I had said to my husband, are we like, am I done? Should I stop saying yes? And he was like, are you crazy? Like, say yes to as many as people will give you. The amount that you're making is amazing. Like, absolutely do as many as you want. And so that's how I ended up doing 60. And 60, like, the hard thing about it, anybody who's speaking knows, it's not like you can spread them out perfectly. It's not like you can say, I'm going to do 60 and that's one every week and then 2 some weeks.
Yeah.
It's this week I have 4 events. Last week I had 4 events. The week before that I had 4 events. Would I ever say I want to do 12 events in 3 weeks? No, but I do a lot of corporate speaking. So it's a lot of sales kickoffs that are happening because it's still the first quarter. So I don't know is the true answer.
Yeah.
And I'm at the point now where I feel like 7 to 8 a month is probably the right balance and amount for me. And I have said no to 2 full fee gigs in cities that are direct flights from Nashville for the month of March because I was like, I just can't. I can't do any more. I have 8 for March and I don't want to do 10. And so I think for me, probably 65 to 70 a year is the right amount.
Cool. Now, you mentioned like things have really picked up in the past couple of years or so, but let's go prior to that. Prior to any speaking at all, what were you doing? What did your professional career look like?
So I launched a marketing agency when I was 26 years old. It was called the Superfan Company, and it was an entertainment marketing company that created collectible products for mainly musical artists. We started in the music space, and then over the years grew to do stuff in movies and video games and sports and other sort of entertainment verticals. But it really started out as a packaging company to help artists with big album releases and tour launches. And I kind of became a speaker by accident. The agency was based in New York, and we were always getting asked to do press because we were pretty successful. Walmart was my first big client, so we were doing a ton of revenue just because every time we had a project, we would be making, 100,000, 200,000 copies of these deluxe releases for people like Katy Perry and Taylor Swift and Justin Bieber. So we were always doing these media things. And one day we were asked to go on Shark Tank. And I said yes, just because I thought it would be fun. I love to watch the show. And after that, I started getting calls from people saying, would you come speak to my company? Would you come speak to my team? Would you come to this event? And it wasn't until I'd been doing it for probably a year or so that I realized people got paid to do that.
Yeah.
And when people started saying, what's your speaker fee? That, like, I thought they were asking me to pay at first. I didn't even know what they meant. And it was so cool to go through the speaker lab because that was the first time that I really thought about the infrastructure of what it looks like and how to do this as a career and how to, not just wait for your phone to ring and say yes when somebody asks you, but actually be intentional and proactive about turning it into a full-time gig.
So just because like people are reaching out like, hey, can you come speak at this thing or we saw you on Shark Tank or can you come do this press tour or whatever, it doesn't necessarily mean like you have to do it. And so it could have just as easily been like, it sounds cool, but thanks, but no thanks type deal. Was there something about speaking where you're going, because again, it didn't seem like speaking is like a core part of your job on a day in and day out basis. And so it wasn't like necessarily a natural transition outside looking in, it seems like that. But was there something about speaking where, all right, I did it a couple times. This one seemed kind of cool. That one seemed kind of cool. And now it's like, I don't know, this is kind of cool. Like maybe there's more to it here. Like what was kind of the evolution of your mindset there?
I think it's that I the first couple times I was asked to speak, and the message was, or sort of the invitation was, well, what do you think you want to speak on? And I said, well, I'd love to speak about how I feel like I've found such success so quickly, because I also kind of became an entrepreneur by accident. When I started my business, I didn't realize how stacked the odds are against startups, and
Yeah.
particularly bootstrapped startups with female founders. I just didn't know. And so I was speaking about some of the things that I felt like had been helpful to me on my journey. And many of them were based around customer experience. What does it feel like to be a customer of your business? How are you treating your customers? How are you making them want to not just come back, but tell their friends? And it was very in alignment with all of the things that I was doing on the entertainment side for my artists, for these artists to create superfans. So I started talking about this idea of what if you could turn your customers into superfans, and what would that look like? And it's funny because the messaging was very much in alignment with the way my dad always talked about customer service. When I was growing up, my dad managed the Long John Silver's in our town. And then later, when I was in high school, he worked at a car dealership doing customer service. And I saw the way he treated his employees, he treated his customers. And it was like a light bulb went off in my head. And I said, this is kind of the same thing. And I remember not understanding why people didn't think customer experience and customer service was like fun and exciting. Like I was
Yeah.
like, this is so important. Why aren't more people jazzed about it? And so when I would get on stage and speak, people would say, wow, I've never heard anybody talk about this with the passion and the enthusiasm that you do. And so many people never get trained in customer experience or even customer service. They're never really shown or taught how to treat customers. And so I think I kind of just found this lane that I'm incredibly passionate about. I'm fortunate that it aligns with a need in the market and is also a way for businesses to say, okay, if we have somebody come in and speak about this, not only are we fundamentally changing the way that our employees think about their role in the organization, but we're giving them a very clear path to more revenue by caring about this thing.
I'm curious a little bit more about that, where one thing that speakers struggle with at times is here's something I'm passionate about, I'm knowledgeable on, I have some experience in, but just because you're passionate, knowledgeable, experienced in that thing doesn't necessarily mean organizations and groups care about that. And maybe even they'd be like, yeah, we care about customer experience, but do they care enough to hire a speaker, a consultant, a coach, or whoever to come in and teach, train, talk about that thing? Customer experience, like there's certainly like a lot of overlap there of like, yeah, this like there's real ROI here and this really translates to the bottom line. But did you have to kind of massage, play with your messaging angle to make sure that just because I'm passionate about this thing that aligns with what organizations would hire a speaker to talk about?
I did. And it's so funny because I struggled at the beginning to pick that lane because, like many speakers starting out, I thought I can speak about whatever you need. What do you
Right.
need? Oh, you need a sales speaker? I can talk about sales. I grew a business from nothing into 8 figures in annual revenue. Like I can talk about that. Oh, you need a marketing speaker? I have a master's degree in marketing. I can talk about how I marketed my company. Oh, you need a leadership speaker? Let me talk about building a team. And I don't want to say that's the wrong strategy because for some people, maybe that works. But I think for the overwhelming majority of people, that is not the strategy that is going to lead to the best gigs the quickest. So for me, it was asking myself, what is what is the thing that all of these things can also be true under? And speaking on customer experience, putting that flag in the ground, saying, I want to be the world's best customer experience speaker. I want to be somebody who is known for this, does not mean I can't have a customer experience message for salespeople and a
Yeah.
customer experience message for marketing teams and a customer experience message for leaders who are building teams within their organization. So for me, customer experience was the thing that was the natural container for everything else that allowed me to be able to lean into multiple talk tracks, but all in a way to where people were like, oh, when I hear the word super fans, I think of Brittany. Or when I need a customer experience speaker, I think of Brittany, versus me just trying to say, like, I've got all these different keynotes and let's pick the one that's going to be best for you.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is like we all recognize that and say like yes, in business for your business over there, you should focus on one thing, you know, but for me, I just want to speak. And so I want to speak on anything and everything, right? And so you're exactly right that, you know, here's I talk about creating super fans and here's some different, you know, some different angles to that, but it all kind of falls under the same umbrella. It sounds easy now, but was there any like epiphany aha moment where you're like, okay, crap, I really do need to double down on this one thing?
Yeah, I think probably one of the clearest moments that sticks out in my mind, Shep Hyken, who is a
Hmm.
very, very dear friend of mine and has just been so incredible to me throughout my career.
Great guy.
I love him, and I was such a fan of his even before I met him. Like, I totally fangirled the first time I had a chance to talk to him, and now he's a very dear friend. He wrote the foreword to my book that came out a couple of years ago, and I remember it was probably like 6 or 8 months before the book was going to come out. I was getting close to turning in the final draft. I think I had done like the first developmental edit maybe. And I had said to him, yeah, I'm so excited for this to be my first book, and I'm already working on the second book. And he was like, what do you mean you're working on the second book? And I said, well, the first book is going to be creating super fans, and then the second book is going to be building super teams, and then the third book is going to be, super brands and super
Yeah.
sales. And he was like, absolutely not. Books are expensive, they are hard, they take time,
Yeah.
and when you put those other books out, nobody's going to want this book. Like, it's going to be your old book. And I said, no, 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 it's like the first in a series. And he said, no, it's not. People are going to look at it as she's jumping from topic to topic, or she's jumping from book to book. And so I, based on Shep saying that, reorganized the entire book, took a bunch of things that I wasn't going to include in the book and did. And so now my book has, I think there's like 8 sections of the book. And the last section is where I go into what the framework that I teach in the book, which is called the super model, but basically how to create super fans in sales, in marketing, in customer service, online, in operations, like all of the things that in my mind were these future standalone things. Shep said, absolutely not. They have to fit under the same umbrella. And then if you want to do more specific content, do it as a video course, like do it as a download that
Yeah.
people can get, but you have to stay on one path if you want to be known for that. And I think that's the moment where obviously I made the changes for the book, but I really started looking at, am I talking about myself everywhere I appear online as a customer experience speaker? And if not, that's what I have to do, because it's a lot easier for myself or a speaker bureau or anybody else who's selling me to say, oh, I know you said you're looking for a sales speaker, but here's why this customer experience message is best for you, than for somebody to go to my website and see 3 or 4 different keynote descriptions or sales pages and be completely confused about who I am and what I speak about.
Let's go back a couple of years where, because I know that the book has been a big resource for you, a big tool for you, and even like being on Shark Tank sounds like a big win. But were you thinking about speaking or doing any speaking at all prior to starting to get some inquiries coming in?
It was something that I enjoyed. It wasn't something that I'd realized I could turn into a career. I
Yeah.
thought perhaps this is something that I can do a handful of times a year. And honestly, one of the things that really kind of flipped my perspective on that, Grant, was when I realized that people weren't writing brand new keynotes each time they spoke.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
the first few times I spoke, I was like, oh, I'm speaking to this organization. What should I talk to them about? Or
yeah.
how should I put my message through the lens of what they're telling me that they need? And once I figured out that the way you do it is by having your own body of work and your own content and doing customization for each client, that's when I really started to think, okay, maybe I could do this more than a handful of times a year if I am not spending, 30 hours
Yeah.
on every single keynote.
Yeah, if when you are, there's so many speakers that go through that of going like, oh man, back to a blank page to start over. It's like, no, 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 no. Like you just gave this talk once. Are you speaking to a different audience? Good. Then you probably figured out some stuff that worked and didn't work from that first one. Let's use that, tweak it, modify it, and use it for the second one, and so on and so forth. And over time, like that's how speakers get really, really good because it's not brand new content every single. Now there may be nuances and little things and examples and case studies or whatever that may change subtly over time, but for the most part, what would you say like is the same material you're doing? You've done 12 events in the past 3 weeks. How much of those 12 talks are identical?
80 to 85%.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which
Or nearly identical with like
totally.
nuance, and it's the really cool thing about getting to do so many in such quick succession is you have an idea where you're like, oh, I could have said this, or this would be a great line, or what if I switch this here, and then you get to immediately try it out. It's not
Yeah.
like, let me ruminate on that for 6 weeks before I have a chance to test my theory.
Which makes it, an example we use a lot is like comedians. You see a Netflix special or whatever, and you think like, oh, they just hop up on stage and tell some jokes, and they're really funny. And it's like, nah, not exactly. Like they've tested, in like small little comedy clubs or traveling around with material and figuring out what works and what doesn't. It's just like this constant live workshop, this live laboratory. So by the time you see something on Netflix, it's like, no, this is like really dialed in, and they are really, really confident that this material works. So
That's
you
such a perfect analogy. Sorry to interrupt your next question, but that is such a perfect analogy. And I love Trevor Noah. He's my favorite
hmm
stand up. And on his last tour, I had the opportunity to see him 3 times. I saw him here in Nashville, and then twice it just happened to work out that I was in the city
Yeah.
where he was. So I saw the show 3 times. And the second and third time, I was dissecting, like, oh, he moved that joke from the end to the
hmm
middle, and he did this and he told this. And then when the special came out on Netflix, I got to watch it for a fourth time. And that was so cool. And I learned a lot. So I would say to anybody who wants to become a better speaker, pick a comedian who you love that you can see a few times, and pick somebody who is
Yeah.
at that like Netflix special level, because they are going to have the craft at a level that perhaps people who are like playing your city twice a week aren't going to. So choose somebody that you really love, see them a few times on the same tour as the content is evolving before the special, and then ask yourself what you can steal from what you saw them do, because that will absolutely help you get better.
A great resource I've recommended several times on the show is a documentary called Comedian with Jerry Seinfeld. It's very old at this point, and it used to be on Netflix. I don't know if it's still there. You can find it. But anyway, the premise was like after the show and Seinfeld ended, Jerry is still like a full-time touring comedian, and he it's him behind the scenes like working on material. And so what it is him going to these small little clubs, and he's like, again, kind of height of fame coming off the end of the sitcom, and he's like testing material and he's bombing and he's telling jokes that just aren't funny. And so you think like, oh, it's Jerry Seinfeld, he's a comic legend. And it's like, right, but he's also like he's doing the same thing that every other comedian or speaker is doing, which is I'm making an educated guess. I think this is funny. I think this will resonate. I think this will make sense, but I don't know. And so it's just kind of like behind the scenes of like how the sausage is made, and then it kind of all leads to the culmination of him recording this special for HBO or something. But it's just you see how this all comes together, and it's not just like I just scribbled some jokes on a napkin and hopped up on stage and it was all funny. Like it just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, it's such a good movie. And it's funny because there's a couple points in there where it's just a perfect analogy for speaking, because there's something that you're like, but I think it's so funny and I want it to work so bad. And I think all of us speakers have had those moments where we're like, but this joke is so funny. Like, this is such a great analogy. This is such a great story. And after, 2 or 3 times of it just not connecting, you have to kind of like put your tail between your legs and be like, all right, I guess we're going to retire that one and keep it for the things that I thought were really great but didn't work on stage. Or there's stuff that like works really well on a podcast, or really great
Yeah.
in a video, or on a book, or in a book, but just like doesn't work on stage. Like and you just have to get those reps in. Like there are parts of my book that I'm like, oh, this people tell me they loved this part of the book all the time. I need to develop this into a stage story, and it just lands flat. Same
Yeah.
content, different delivery,
Different context.
media. Yeah,
Do you use a lot of humor on stage, don't you?
I do.
How do you think about humor, like especially like in this analogy of going like sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's funny with one audience, and you tell the exact same story, the exact same joke the next day, and it doesn't land. You know, so how do you kind of think about humor, when to use it, when to not use it? And the other challenge for a lot of speakers is kind of finding the balance of you don't want to be the speaker who an event planner's like, yeah, they were really funny, but there wasn't a lot of substance or content. You know, like the audience laughed, but they didn't really get much from it. How do you kind of think about all that?
Yeah, a few years ago, somebody gave me what was probably one of my favorite sort of performance evaluations ever, where they said, I feel like you're the perfect mix of a stand up comedian and a college professor. I've
Mm.
never laughed so much while learning so much. And I loved that. And since then, I've kind of thought about it on that continuum of like, where do I fall? Because it's not ever going to be 50-50. Like, what is the mix between humor and learning, and who is the audience? Because as you said, you know, an audience of all women versus all men versus 50-50 versus 70-30. What are their ages? What are their industries? What are like sometimes I go into like rural cities and it's just I can't tell the same jokes, or I can't do the same things that are gonna, work if everybody is from New York or LA or Chicago. So it really is understanding your audience. I have a lot of questions that I ask about the audience composition on the pre-event call, but my favorite tool, which I wish every single speaker used, is something called Mentimeter. And it's a live collaboration platform. And a lot of speakers are afraid to use it. And I think part of the reason a lot of speakers are afraid to use it is because they've heard horror stories of people using it through PowerPoint and having tech issues. The
Minty
PowerPoint,
meter?
yeah, it's called Mentimeter, Mentimeter.com. And
I don't
I
think I've heard
will
of
go on
this.
record as saying the PowerPoint extension is garbage. So don't do that. But menti.com it's basically a web-based presentation platform. So you can just
Yeah.
upload your slides and present live, but everybody in the audience can participate. So you can throw up a
Okay.
QR code at the beginning, and then you can ask questions, and you can do quizzes, you can do multiple choice, you can do word clouds and short answers. And that for me is a way to bring a lot of humor into my presentations, because people are always going to say funny stuff, or I'm talking about customer experience, so I'm asking about experiences at
Yeah.
places, and there's always going to be the same few that come up. So I know, like, if somebody says Chick-fil-A, I have a funny Chick-fil-A story I can tell. If somebody says Olive Garden, I've got like an Olive Garden story I can like. There's probably 50 stories that I have in my back pocket, and I don't know which ones I'm going to tell. I don't know what joke I'm going to make or what point I'm going to make,
Yeah.
because it's going to be based on what somebody in the audience says. But that's a way to make it really engaging and to feel like it's more improv than it is, because it's
Right.
like controlled improv. I don't know what joke I'm going to make, but I know that before I go from slide 11 to slide 12, there's going to be a funny joke that's going to get everybody laughing, and that's going to be the transition to the next thing.
I do like the controlled improv. I think is such a good way of thinking about it, where you've got this kind of like repertoire of I know if someone says this, I know what my go-to thing is, and you just kind of like we have this invisible backpack of jokes and punchlines and stories, and like something happens, and you just you reach into the backpack, and I know what to pull out. And so for an audience, they're going like, "Oh my gosh, that just happened," and it's like, yes. Sort of, there's a sleight of hand happening behind the scenes of how this actually took place. Have you like how do you build confidence with that? Is that just reps? Is that just come with time? Because there's times where again, like you're gonna throw out something on the fly that wasn't scripted, that wasn't planned, that it was this, someone said Chick-fil-A the first time and you said something and you're like, holy crap, that worked. I need to use that every time someone says Chick-fil-A. And then someone said Olive Garden one time and you said something and it didn't work the first time. So how have you kind of navigated like creating that controlled improv environment?
I think part of it is knowing your own risk tolerance,
Mm-hmm.
because I know that I'm teaching people stuff. Like, people are walking away with new tools to think about customer experience, that I am okay with something bombing and making like a self-deprecating aside or joke, and acknowledging that like that was sort of cringe, and then we all move on together.
Yeah.
I know some speakers who would never want to do that, who would want to just like crawl under a rock. So I think part of it is getting comfortable with your own style and doing something that feels authentic to you. Um, like I'm a very awkward person. Like I'm not, it's not a stretch for me to say something that doesn't land and make a joke about it and move on, because anybody watching me, like, nobody's going to mistake me for somebody who was like an athlete in school or
Yeah.
like super cool. So for me, it's sort of like just, embrace it, move on. But I think that's something that everybody has to sort of say is like, what is your plan? Because there are times, there are times on stage where I've been like, whoa, awkward turtle. All right, guys, moving on. And, you just kind of like move on. There are also times when I've had people say like really inappropriate stuff or
Yeah.
ask really inappropriate things, and you have to kind of like control the room. And, the more reps you get, the crazier stuff you have with, Amber alerts and everybody's phones are going off. Or I've been on stage twice when there's been a fire alarm at the hotel and everybody's had to evacuate. I mean, just like the
Yeah.
crazy things. And I feel like the more you're exposed to any of that, the better you are on the fly at whatever comes your way, even if it's a story that you thought in the moment was going to be great that didn't really land.
Yeah. Even
I'll
kind
also
of,
say it's like some events are a little bit lower stakes in
yeah.
terms of either the makeup of the audience or, and it's like, you practice the things that feel riskier with the ones that you're like, if it doesn't land, I'm still going to be their favorite speaker.
Yeah, 100%. I think that that's such a great point. It's just kind of, if you're speaking at 50 different events, the stakes aren't going to be equal at all of them. There's going to be some you're like, this has to go flawless. And some that you're like, yeah, we can kind of ebb and flow through this one. And not that you're like phoning it in or going through the motions, but you could probably, if you kind of fumble on a joke or two or a story or whatever, you can get away with that. And the risk is much lower there. Also thinking back through, like looking at this Mentimeter here, anytime you are sharing the stage, so to speak, with the audience, you're taking a risk, especially if someone's able to type something in that is suddenly going to appear on screen. So like, how do you think about that, work on that, to where, again, like you said, there's times when you call on someone and you want to make this interactive, engaging type of presentation, but when you call on someone or you let people type something in that's going to appear on the screen behind you, it's massively risky. And sometimes like this works incredibly well. And sometimes like, oh crap, how am I going to get out of this one? So talk to us about that, kind of how you think about that.
Yeah, it's funny. I had an event last week and for a huge like multi-billion-dollar company, and one of their executives said, I don't think internally everybody is a super fan of this company. And I want to ask them, I want you to say, are you a super fan of this company? And I was like, are you sure? Like, you're the boss, but are you sure? And they said yes. And then they said, and then the next thing I
But is
want
this
you to
happening
ask.
live, like on stage?
Yeah. Well, no, this was in the pre-event call. They said
Okay,
they
okay,
wanted me to ask it live on stage.
okay, I got
They
you.
said they wanted me to ask, like, are you a super fan of our company? And then why or why not?
Mm-hmm.
And then what's a competitor that you think is doing a better job than we're doing and why?
Wow.
And so I was like, look, you're the boss. And this was 150 leaders in a room. And, it wasn't being live streamed anywhere. And for them, it was all about showing the room, we want your authentic feedback. Like we're not trying to sugarcoat this, and we have somebody here who's here to help us get better, and we're not going to be able to get better until we can like take that honest look in the mirror.
Yeah.
So having a conversation with every pre-event organizer, and talking through sort of like what are the risks that we want to take or not take, how do we want to control the environment based on the questions that we're asking.
Crazy. All right, let's talk about this. You again, business has grown significantly. As business has grown, there's no shortage of opportunities, like you mentioned in the book. Are you still, like you mentioned at the beginning, you were doing the kind of the marketing agency? Are you still involved with that? Are you out of that? Where does that
I'm
stand?
out of that. I sold all my equity in that
Okay.
business in 2019,
Okay.
when my speaking started to take off. So
Okay.
thank you for inviting me into the Speaker Lab in 2018, Grant.
Perfect. Perfect. Right before the world ended.
Yes.
So then, again, like, all right, so you sold your equity there, and then you had the book, speaking's taking off. And again, there's no shortage of things that you could do. And like you mentioned, I've got a dozen other book ideas, and I'm sure there's opportunities for coaching, consulting, again, any number of things. So how have you kind of thought through what to say yes to, what to say no to, where to focus. Because there's also, if you look at 100 different speakers who have been at it for a while and been successful, like they all do it 100 different ways. So it's not that one's better, worse than the other. You got to kind of determine like, no, this makes sense and this works for me. So how do you think about that? How have any criteria that you have for saying yes or no?
Yeah, well, I will preface this by saying I don't feel like I get it right 100% of the time. And, my business is evolving just like everyone else's business is evolving. I was asked several times in very quick succession in 2013 if I would develop a training course for teams, especially enterprise teams like big companies, big organizations, to train their frontline employees on customer service and customer experience. And like the third time I got asked in a span of a week, I said maybe I should do this because this is an ask that keeps happening. And so I went to those three clients and two others and said, if I built this, would you buy it?
Mm-hmm.
And what would you like to see? And so when I knew, all right, I've got, $50,000 in guaranteed revenue of people that are want to buy this day one, then I built it. And so now it's turned into a six-figure revenue stream every year. It's called the 6 Weeks to Superfans Masterclass. And I've got, like dozens of companies now that are putting their team members through it. So everybody in their organization goes through this training session. And then as they hire new people, they continue to have this be part of onboarding over the past year. So we just launched it. We launched it at the beginning of 2024. So we've had people going through it for like 15 months or something. I have been asked lots and lots and lots and lots of times over the past year to create a version for startups, to create a version for solopreneurs, to create versions for small teams. And I just haven't done it yet because when the majority of people are paying me licensing fees that are, $15,000, $20,000 based on the number of people that are going through it, I just can't prioritize somebody who wants to pay $500 and like a huge amount of my time along with that $500.
Yeah.
It's an enterprise offer. And that's been one of the things that's been really hard for me is because, you want to say yes to everybody. You want to find a way to help everyone. But I've had to say to lots and lots and lots of people who follow me on social media or are part of my newsletter, I wish I could offer this to you. But what I can offer you is, and then like all of the free things that I have, right? Like I'm creating videos every single week on social media. I have a podcast. I have all of these tools that go along with my book. Here are the free resources because I just can't sell this for $500 or $1,000 because it's not fair to the people that are paying me 20,000 or more.
Is that hard, or do you ever feel like you're leaving either A, leaving money on the table, or B, of just feeling like I'm disappointing people or I'm letting people down? Again, like that's not the reality, but sometimes internally we can kind of play this narrative in our minds, as speakers, influencers, entrepreneurs, whatever we want to describe ourselves as. Does that weigh on you either from like a mental standpoint or from like a financial standpoint of like, all these people are trying to give me money. Maybe we should come up with a way to take it. Like, how do you think about that?
It has honestly the disappointing people probably weighs on me more because from the financial side, I'm sure many speakers have experienced this of it's oftentimes the people who have the more constrained budgets that have the highest expectations.
Yeah.
So the amount of effort that you're spending for that money is like 100x
Yeah. Yeah.
compared to some of the other opportunities. So I know I'm leaving money on the table. I've actually had a few people come to me and offer to license it and ask to build communities and do all of the things that it would take to make it work on a small business scale versus a corporate scale. And I've just had to politely decline because the other part of this reality, Grant, that I know you understand, like I've got two little kids.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to be intentional about my time and my schedule to where when I'm home and I can do my kid had a bubble run at school this morning, which is like a fundraiser thing where they
Yeah.
run around a track through bubbles. Like I made sure I was home for that. Like I want to be able to go to the lunches and go to the, parties and all of those things. And so for me, it's like, am I leaving money on the table? Yes, but there will also be money to get when my kids are a little bit older than they are right now. Right now they're 4 and 7. So it's not about the extra dollars. It's about the extra bedtimes that I get to do instead of missing.
Let's talk about that for a second, and we'll kind of wrap up with this. Where part of being a speaker, I had a friend tell me one time, like speaking is a high paying manual labor job in that you get paid way too well to stand on stage and run your mouth. But the nature of speaking is you have to get on a plane, you have to leave your family, you have to go somewhere. And there are certainly parts of it that are cool. Like, you stand on stage, people laugh at your jokes, they give you a bunch of money, they want to take pictures with you, they give you standing ovations, you fly, first class and yada, yada, yada. But there's also plenty of times where you're like, I just want to be in my own bed right now. I don't want to be here. And it doesn't, like, there's no amount of money that will justify me being here right now when I just want to be home with the people that I love the most. How do you think about that? How do you process that, especially where like business has grown very quickly? When you go from a handful of gigs to doing 80 gigs a year, that's going to translate to probably, 100, 120 nights a year on the road. And there's some where you're like, I can fly in, I do the gig, I come back, or I'm gone just one night. And like you mentioned, there's times where you can kind of schedule like, okay, I got this fundraiser at my kid's school that I can plan around. But there's other things where like you're booking something a year out and the school calendar's just not out yet, and a game falls on that date or a play or a practice or a recital or whatever. And you're just like, why the heck am I doing this? Like how, I don't know, how have you kind of processed that?
Well, I think it's, again, being very transparent that I'm not going to get it right all the time. And my kids know that. And that's a conversation that we have a lot. And my oldest had an idea probably about a year ago. I was leaving for some event and he was like, Mom, I know they pay you. And I was like, they do pay me. And he was like, why don't we get paid? Like, me and brother have to do extra stuff when you're gone. Like, we should be making money. And I was like, you know what, buddy, you're right. You should be making money. So now every time I have a gig, both of my kids have the opportunity to earn $10 for every night that I'm gone, which usually corresponds to the number of events, right? Like if I'm
Yeah.
gone for, I try to never ever be gone for more than 3 nights, and I try to not be gone for more than 2 nights, but sometimes it happens.
Yeah.
So they can each earn $10, and they do that by doing everything that they need to do at home to make things run smoothly for dad while I'm gone.
Yeah.
And so now, of course, my kids still want me to be here. And of course, they're still sad when I leave, but they're so excited because they have the opportunity to earn that money. And there's a few things that I've done to make it a little bit easier for my kids. Number one, I have a big old school calendar on the wall that
Mm-hmm.
has the whole year. And I put a dot for every event that I have. So my kids can like visually see the dots of mom's going to be gone on this day. There's a big map next to it so my kids can see where I'm going. My kids are probably better at geography than like, anybody else their ages, because they love to see like, oh, mom's going to fly from Kansas City to Portland and then she's coming home and then we're all going to Orlando and then she's going to go to New York or, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So having that for them to visually see, and then having routines. Like my youngest kid loves to FaceTime as soon as I get in the hotel because he wants to see the hotel room. What does it
Yeah.
look
Yeah.
like? Is there a balcony? How big is the bathroom? My oldest wants to see the seat that I'm sitting on in the airplane. I live in Nashville, so most of the time I'm flying Southwest to get to places. So it's
Yep.
not first class. It's like, A-list preferred.
Yep.
So he wants me to take a picture of the seat that I'm in and tell him, if I got the exit row and with all the extra space or not. And so having those sort of routines, trying to always be available for the ride to school. That's like one of our times that we talk. So if I'm not either sound checking or on stage, I know that at 8:22 they're going to call me and I'm going to get to talk to them until they get dropped off at school. So just the little things like that try to bring a little bit of sense of like continuity or
Yeah.
routine, even though it's is very disruptive to their lives.
I've also found I found this in my own experience when I was speaking full time, but then also a lot of speakers where speaking can be very cyclical. Like you mentioned, this past 3 weeks is 12 events. That's just a busy stretch, right? But you might find another 3 week stretch where you have like 2 events and you're home all the time. And, maybe your husband and kids are like, you got anything you could go do, Mom? Are you sure? You're like, because like, I think like I also often compare to, you and I both live here in Nashville, we both work from home, and I've got several neighbors who like work downtown and they've got like an hour commute, to and from dealing with traffic, and I'm just like, you're gone all day, 5 days a week. And I would argue, even though, Brittany or myself or whoever may be on planes a decent amount and sleeping in hotels from time to time, like we're home a significant amount. So it is kind of like, it's not always like as bad as, we make it seem. There's certainly times you're just like, man, this sucks. Flight delays and cancellations and, weather and all the stuff that we can't control. But there's also just like, this is a pretty good life. And, like you mentioned, we were talking a little bit beforehand, like you got gigs coming up where your kids are coming with you and you're going to tack on some different, touristy stuff and sightseeing stuff and fun adventures that maybe, other families may not get to participate in or be a part of. So there's a lot of upside to, what we do from a family perspective as well.
Yeah, and kids are resilient, right? And kids love adventure. My son, my oldest son, who's first grader, had a class project a few weeks ago where they had to make a timeline and they had to choose one picture from each year of their life and then write about what that was. And for the year that he was 5, he chose getting to introduce me on stage in front of 1,000 people and like
That's
tell
cool.
jokes. And for his 7th birthday, I had a bureau like mess a date up, and they booked me. I had said I could be the opening but not the closing speaker, and somehow they messed it up. And they were like, "We really, really, really need you to do this event." And I was like, "No, it's my kid's birthday. I'm not doing it." And they said, "Well, what if we just fly the whole family out and you guys spend the weekend there?" And I said, "Okay, well, I'll talk to my son, but it's his decision." And my kids had never been to Arizona. They'd never been to the desert. And I asked my son, like, "Do you want to have your 7th birthday in Arizona and then we'll do your party later?" And he was like, "That sounds amazing. Like, do we get to go to the desert? Do we get to, see a snake? Do we get like, what kind of lizards do they have in Arizona?" And like, that was what he had chosen from turning 7. And there was something, I forget what it was from turning 6, but it was also a trip that we had been on for work. So, there's pros and cons. And what I'm telling myself right now is I'm trying to go really hard and do a lot, because I know it's going to be harder for me to be gone when they're a little bit older. Because
Yeah.
right now, even if I miss something, like we can FaceTime, I can buy my way back in their good graces with the right Lego set, or, saying, yeah, I missed this, but we're
Yeah.
taking this trip or we're doing that. And I think that's going to get harder as they get older. So my hope is to do as many events as I can now, so that A, I can raise my fee a lot higher than it is for when they're a little bit older, and B, be able to, stay at home more.
Yeah. Cool, cool. All right, we got to wrap up. Hey, if people want to find out more about you and what you're up to, where can we follow you, and tell us about the book as well?
You can find all of the things at brittanyhodak.com. The book is called Creating Superfans. It's available at Amazon and everywhere else books are sold. And for anybody out there who wants to know everything that I did wrong writing and launching this book, I put together like a 35-page PDF of everything. I shared all the numbers, what I paid for, how many I sold, like all the things. Send me an email, Brittany@brittanyhodak.com, and I will hook you up with that. It's somewhere on my website. I wish I knew the URL. I don't. You can probably find it at brittanyhodak.com, but if not, send me an email and I will send you that, so that you can maybe not make all the same mistakes I did when I launched my first book.
Brittany, you're awesome. Thanks so much for the time. We really appreciate you.
Thanks, Grant.